does it mean coming to your authentic self? Does it mean that you can lash out when you want to, have a mood swing when you want to, get angry when you want to, and act in all sorts of ways at will just because that's how you felt at that time and therefore you're being true to yourself? Well, not quite. When we are authentic, we are acting from a whole version of ourself that encapsulates mind, body, spirit, emotion, all of it. It isn't a case of that I'm being true to myself, but it's a case of I'm being true to the whole version of myself, not a sense of self that I have learned to wear as my garb as a result of my sense of self having been fragmented. Whether that means that you, when you were developing your sense of self, which is where is my place in the physical world, when you were developing your sense of self at that time, whether or not you had a mirror to mirror back to you how you're truly feeling, as opposed to mirror back to you what is expected and how you failed miserably in not meeting the expectations, right? Or how good you were in meeting expectations of you, right? And making sure that you were being carved out into being a person that is meeting the expectations of our caregivers, of our school teachers, of society, of people that we meet day to day. And for some of you, that might have meant suppressing your emotions. For some of you, it might have meant that all you were doing, because remember, when you're a child, there is no other time apart from when we are in our childhood and later on in our lives when we feel so helpless, so vulnerable, so dependent that there is no other choice for us during that time but to simply succumb to being accepted. Because at that time, as a child who has no resources, right, is going to give into that because they know that they have no other way to be than to be in a way that's going to meet the expectations of all those around us. Some of the children will act out when they're really trying to fight for themselves. Some of the children may just shut down completely, so their stress response is kicked in, and the result of this is a personality that is skewed, a sense of physical existence that is skewed. So from here develops our physical sense of self, which you can say our mental image of who we think we are based on the persona that we took on as the persona or the vehicle through which our needs would be met. For some of us, this means that in order for our needs to be met, we would have to become hyper vigilant so that we are making sure that before something happens, so that we are not accepted or we are admonished and we fall from grace, right? We would then make sure that we preempt that, right? Now, this is where you have the very, very obedient children who will very, very rarely ever try to do their own thing in school or do their own thing at home. They are followers. They will fall into place wherever you want them to. Now, what happens? Very, very rarely would children have been mirrored, would have been given a mirror that expresses the true emotion that a child is feeling at a time when the child is emotionally dysregulated. Now, when the child, for example, when they're younger and they're having a tantrum, parents go through all forms of stress these days. Some don't even have the support. Apart from that, whereas you might have been the best mirror possible for your child, your then child goes into school. So the schools will have their own behavioral policies, they'll have their own rules and regulations, right? And your child will be trying to fit in. Your child leaves school. Once all that is over, then what do? We either get into other forms of education, and all around us there will be etiquette, there will be behavior, there are all sorts of unspoken of systems that are in place which mean that we have to act in a certain way. Now, when we are acting in a certain way, which means that we have diverged, digressed, diverted from who we really were and what our physical sense of self was at the time, which was then developing. So for example, you may have had a ton of questions, right? You may have been told to shut up. You may have had a ton of questions that were answered, but maybe not so much so. You may have been frustrated as a child, but your frustration might have been misinterpreted as bad behavior. You might have lashed out, and that might have also been misinterpreted as whatever other issues. So a lot of us, try as we may, as parents as well as caregivers, right? You may have consciously tried to be a good mirror, or an accurate mirror for your child, but you would only be an accurate mirror in as much as your caregivers would have been accurate mirrors for you, because you would have your own story that you're carrying with you, which will shape how you then parent your child, unless you're now a conscious parent who is aware of their own limitations. Now that sense of self develops, and this sense of self, as long as it remains fragmented, right, then the walk into the authentic self becomes very, very difficult. The first part of walking into your authentic self is to identify your false persona as far as your physical sense of self is concerned. You could be doing this alongside or concurrent to a spiritual awakening in which you are integrating your sense of self, your authentic sense of self, which encompasses and integrates your spirit and your connection to all of it and your true source of what you are. Once all of this is done, folks, you are well and truly ready to walk into your true authentic sense of self, right? Now, during the transition, as you're healing, some of you might go through all forms of healing crisis, right? If you were somebody who could not speak out, you may be going through all sorts of maybe coughs, maybe you're having pain in your throat, maybe you're screaming a lot, right? Maybe you can't control yourself and you're now lashing out. Maybe you're a child who was very suppressed before and now you're literally coming out. There are so many ways in which a healing crisis will take place during your spiritual awakening. Your awareness will let you know where you are, but as long as you're aware, you will know, am I acting from the hurt? Am I acting from my fragmented sense of self, or am I now in my authentic self? For a while, your authentic self will be you acting in that way. Lots of love. Take care.